we, Jerry and I do the adult ed programs at Kehilat Hanahar, and it is very exciting for us to have continuing education of all sorts. It is varied because, like so many places, we have a variety of people's interest in our own little shul. And that really kind of touches on the subject itself, because when I was a child, there was no such thing as not being an Orthodox Jew and where I grew up. But all of a sudden there's this flowering, and then learning about other denominations of Jews, and then these crossovers. And so this program started by my stumbling across a book, and I'll hold that up and I'll show it to you. And it's called American Jew, Jews, Buddhists, and Religious Change by Emily Sigalo. I will share with you that I was in contact with Sigalo, and I really tried very hard to get her, but she just was not available. So I decided instead, I'm going to read the book. I'll do some research. I will digest the subject and do the program myself. And I'm happy that I did, because I really have been enjoying it. The flyer shows several books. There are many books, and I'll talk to you about it. But basically, we are involved in a phenomenon of American Jews searching for spirituality in different traditions, while maintaining one's own historical roots. The contact and the experiences really has enriched people. Why? Meditation has come to America. Meditation has come to Kehilat Hanahar. Yoga exists at Kehilat Hanahar. But there was a time, we haven't in recent years, but I know that on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, usually the less formal and more creative interpretation, we started the day with yoga. And that didn't happen when I was a child. Buddhism has become medicalized without calling it Buddhism. We have practitioners of stress reduction. That has worked very well. We've got all kinds of interesting examples of musicians like Leonard Cohen, who was actually an ordained Buddhist monk, but very much a Jew. Norman Fisher, there are all kinds of people, and we'll get into that. So join us. We will have an interesting program. I'm going to start off first by showing you a 7-minute video which I found on YouTube, and it's done by an Israeli, ultra-Orthodox person by the name of Gutman Locks. To me, a little bit of a rascal, but I really enjoy him, and where he's interviewing a young man by the Western Wall on Buddhism. So it'll be 7 minutes, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion afterwards. So Jerry, I'll ask you to run the video. The sound. Jerry, do you have this?
Try again. I was muted. Sorry.
Spencer, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Please
too.
tell us something about your background. You have a very unusual background.
Well, I studied Chinese and Japanese studies at the University of Albany in New York.
And you also studied other things there, like philosophy, religion, spirituality?
Yes, I studied Buddhism.
And meditation?
Yes.
You're fluent in Chinese?
And Japanese.
And Japanese. That's an amazing accomplishment. Do you have any questions on Jewish meditation?
Yes.
Please tell me, please ask.
Well, what exactly is Jewish meditation?
if the subject of the meditation is something that we do not want to learn any more about, like in Buddhist meditation on a glass apple, they don't want to learn much about the glass apple. They're using it as a tool to focus on, or a flame. Then the mind becomes passive and relaxed. Or if we meditate on some subject that we want to know more about, like where is God? And you think deeper and deeper, or in Buddhist meditation, the nature of self, then the mind becomes active. So all meditation will pretty much fall into either active or passive. But the big differences between our techniques and the Buddhist techniques are our goals. Where the Buddhist goal, primarily, generally speaking, is detachment.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Detachment, remove suffering, prevent reincarnations. The Jewish goal is to attach properly. Buddhism teaches that this world is really an illusion, like nothing. And really, everything is really nothing. That's not so far away from what the Torah says. The Torah says that this physical world is being made from nothing. Yesh me'ayin, it's called. It's still being made out of nothing. But the big difference is Buddhism says, since it's basically nothing, don't move, don't make waves, you have to ride on the waves. We say, now it is something. It's here for a purpose. And we should fulfill our purpose by using it for holy purposes. How do we do that? We elevate the world. We take food and we make it proper food, holy food. Our actions, we make holy actions. And then instead of leaving the world, we elevate the world. Let me give you a clue how you can find your goal in a Jewish way and not stray so far from the Buddhist concept. One of the things that the Buddhists seek for is the nature of self. Now, self is such a thing where you can point to it, but you're not going to grab it. But let me show you a way to find it. Say, I am standing here talking to Goodman. Say that.
I am standing here talking to Goodman.
Now take a take on that. Figure out, what do you mean I am standing here talking to Goodman? You got an idea. Now say the same sentence and take out I am and put in it is and say it.
It is standing here talking to Goodman.
What happened different?
Well, I guess I eliminated my idea of I.
Explain, please.
Well, calling myself an it takes me into an objective stance on who I am.
Okay. So then if this, which was I am, now became it, who's talking?
I don't know.
You. And we teach that the body is a garment, a vehicle that we ride in. Now the soul, without a body, cannot do anything in this world. And the body without a soul is dead. So we have to have them both. So our job is to have the soul influence the body so it makes proper decisions so that we live a holy life. Okay, now let's look at light. Like sunlight. We can't see the light, goes too fast. But if we bend it through a prism, what do we see?
Colors.
7 colors. Okay, now with this finger point to the blue light and with this finger point to the red light. How many lights you're pointing at?
2.
1 light. 2 colors.
I see.
Got it? Okay, now the world is basically like colors and shapes and forms. But it's really made out of 1 light. Now the big difference between us and Buddhism, because that's pretty close to what they say, is that we say that the world is made out of light and there's a light without end. But we also say there's one that brings this light without end into being. That's the creator of the universe. All existence is one. The Torah says there is God and nothing else. So for our passive meditation, we'll watch the breath. And for your passive meditation over there, they'll watch the breath too. But if you just watch the breath and don't do anything more, you'll detach so far away that you may not go to work in the morning. So what we do is add an active aspect to that meditation. By every few cycles, we remember the line of the Torah that God breathes the breath of life into man. And just like does God breathe in your life, his life, breathes everybody's life. So now we think about God and what's going on, then we go back to the passive. All meditation have certain benefits in common. Reduce blood pressure, reduce anxiety and depression, So whichever one you're going to have, you'll have these physical benefits. But whether or not there'll be a spiritual benefit will depend upon your understanding of the nature of existence. What Buddhism apparently says, and sometimes they change, there's no God. Their only objective is to detach from the universe and leave it. When we say there is a creator, our job in meditation is to reveal God's presence and try to learn how to serve him better. Our objective is not to remove desires, but to direct our desires to use them for good. Because our goals are different, our meditations are different. Because if the goal is just to detach, then I would use just a passive, look at their glass apple forever. You'd be totally detached. But that doesn't satisfy a Jewish goal, because a Jewish goal includes family and making the world a better place. How many years have you spent studying Buddhist philosophy in Chinese?
It's probably been around 5 or 6 years.
5 or 6 years. Come study the path you were born to. You were born as a Jew. It's only natural you should follow the Jewish path.
I just might.
But you will.
Okay, so I want to spend like just 2 or 3 minutes and tell me, what do you think's going on? Anybody?
I'd be curious about what drew that young man to, at that point in his life, talk to the rabbi. And I think that the rabbi in many ways did a good job of explaining certain things, but I also disagree that, from what I understand, some Buddhists can't live a very engaged life, a different kind of engaged.
Yes.
So.
Anybody else? The rabbi is quite a character. I mean, I could see him selling all kinds of stuff.
Abraham, I wanted to
yes.
add, toward the end, I thought the rabbi was, I guess, pushy.
Yes.
He asked the kid a question, now what are you going to do? And what's the kid going to say? I'm going to do what the Jew.
Okay. Well, I think for yes, Susan.
Yeah, I can only speak. I noticed in myself some resistance to him. And as Rabbi Diana was saying, in terms of, I think there might have been an oversimplification of detachment and attachment. I think that there is Buddhist tradition that is also driven on intentionality and also noticing emotions, thoughts, right? Following those things. So I felt like there was perhaps an oversimplification, but of course in 7 minutes, that's a big task. So
I do know from researching a little bit that Gutman went through a period of his life where he was very much practicing Buddhist ideas, and then he returned or became fully Jewish. However, what he's missing that he really, in my book, that he should have known is there are so many different kinds of Jews, so many different kinds of Buddhists. American Buddhists are not Asian Buddhists. It's a whole different kettle of fish, and we'll get into that. And the book does a masterful job in explaining the evolution of Buddhism. Okay, so first, I started telling you about this book, and I read it carefully and did a lot of underlining and a lot of note taking. And I'm just going to read from my notes just a few paragraphs as a way of introducing this. Emily Segelow wrote this in 2019. She was at Brandeis University. She got a PhD, and she is a sociologist. So she's really studied and interviewed hundreds of people and then categorized the experiences and the histories and so on in order to write this book. She cites, for example, that Roger Kamenetz, and many of you may know him. In fact, one of the books right here, this is a book that he has written, which I think is just masterful, written, I guess, in the 70s, called The Jew and the Lotus. Roger Kamenetz, author of The Jew and the Lotus, estimates that Jews represent about 30% of Western Buddhist groups in the United States. What's going on? Okay. Dozens of celebrities, including Goldie Hawn, Leonard Cohen, Steven Seagal, Norman Fisher, Mandy Patinkin, have publicly extolled their Jewish Buddhist identities. There were, in particular, a group of 4 American Jews: Sharon Salzberg, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, and I'm not familiar with Jacqueline Mandel Schwartz, popularized mindfulness meditation in the United States. And we're all now very familiar with that. We have that one going now in our shul. Jane is doing meditations, is it weekly, I think? So we have it here, but it didn't happen overnight, but these people were very instrumental in that. And then I mentioned about medicalizing. John Kabat-Zinn popularized the secular psychotherapeutic Buddhism in the early 1990s, and I'm calling it medicalized Buddhism. Zinn has a degree from MIT in molecular biology. He studied Buddhism with Thich Nhat Hanh. Bernie Glassman has a degree in aeronautical engineering and pursued a PhD in mathematics and became a leader in social issues. Psychiatrist Mark Epstein is from the Harvard Medical School, and he's written a number of books, all very important, Jewish Buddhist writers. And now what I want to do is I want to show you I found an interview done with Emily Sigalo. It's too long, it's 32 minutes, but I want to play 10 minutes of it. So you'll hear her, and the first 10 minutes has the most significant questions by the interviewer, and you'll see, get a sense for her. So Jerry, I'll ask you to play that.
Hi, welcome to Jewish Culture and Jewish Awareness. My name is Dustin Hausner. I am the Jewish Outreach and Program Director at the Wayne YMCA. All our Jewish programming is funded through the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey. Today we have a wonderful guest that I'm excited to talk to because she wrote, I think, a very thought-provoking book, and it talks about a very interesting relationship in Judaism with Buddhism, which I'm going to wait for the author to go into in a few moments. But just to introduce our author, Emily Sigalo is a sociologist of contemporary Jewish life who focuses in particular on the American Jewish community. She has held various academic positions at Brandeis University, Duke University, and Wesleyan University. Emily serves as the executive director at the UJA Federation of New York, where she directs the research, evaluation, and measurement department. Emily recently finished a book project about the historical and contemporary encounter between Judaism and Buddhism in America, which is what we're about to discuss. The book, American Jew-Boo, Jews, Buddhists, and Religious Change, explains how Judaism and Buddhism met, combined, and changed in relation to each other in America since 1893. So Emily, thank you so much for joining us today and for writing such a very interesting topic and book.
Thank you, Dustin. I'm really happy to be here with you.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. So let's start with something very simple. So the term Jew-boo, it sounds straightforward for some people. For some people, it's a very confusing terminology. What do you define as a Jew-boo?
So a Jew-boo is really a portmanteau of, it's a mashup of two words, Jewish and Buddhist. And when I came to this book project, I thought the Jew-boos were a thing, a monolith, a single group. But in fact, there's there are subtypes of Jubus. There's variety in how people engage with Judaism and Buddhism, which after finding, after doing the research, it seems like, of course there are different ways that people are Jewish and Buddhist, but a Jubu in the way that I use it is just somebody who holds a relationship, a meaningful relationship with Judaism and Buddhism. And even though that there's different ways that those relationships are shaped for different groups of people, the umbrella category is just somebody who has a relationship with both of those traditions.
So let me ask, because in the book, you are specific in talking about kind of 3 subgroups of what a Jubu is, which I think is interesting because, as you just were mentioning, some people identify a Jubu as someone who's Jewish who follows Buddhism. Some find it as someone who's Buddhist who has a Jewish background. So it's a couple of different things, but you have 3 very specific subgroups that you have for what a Jubu is, or at least in your research. Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. So when I came to the project, I thought that there was one group of Jubus and that they more or less were the same. And then what I found, which was really interesting, was that there were different types of the ways that people engage with Judaism and Buddhism. So one of the, and of course, whenever you group people together, groups are always rough, right? They're not perfect. There's people that are somewhere in between these groupings, and they're not impermeable circles, but they do kind of different subtypes or groupings do help explain different relationships. So there's one group that's a group of Jubus who are people who were for whom Judaism was their primary meaning-making system. Judaism was their primary religion, their tradition, their holidays. It was their primary practice. It was their community. And for many in this group, they were observant, practicing Jews. And this group of Jews also had a relationship with Buddhism that was primarily focused on practice. They would have these were people who saw themselves as Jews, but who also had a Buddhist practice. And largely that practice was a meditation practice. So they would go to various Buddhist centers or maybe go on a Buddhist retreat to cultivate that practice. But for them, they were primarily first and foremost Jews who had this practice. There was a second group of Jubus that came out of the research were people who were, I would say, primarily Buddhist, for people for whom Buddhism was their primary meaning-making system. It was their Buddhist center was their community. Buddhism was their practice. It was also their framework for meaning-making. It was their philosophy. It was their teachings. But for these Jewish Buddhists, these Jubus, Judaism was their culture and their heritage, where they came from. It was their family tradition, and they identified primarily as Buddhists, but they also identified as being Jewish because Jewish was also part of who they are, where they came from, and part of their identity. And so, even if it wasn't their current way in which they expressed, their practice. And then and this was the smallest group. So there's group 1, group 2, group 3. Group 3 were people who really felt that they were both. That Judaism and Buddhism were their practice, that they had Jewish practices and Jewish observances and Buddhist practices and Buddhist observances, and that both the communities were their communities. They belonged to the Jewish, to their Jewish synagogues, and to maybe other Jewish organizations, and similarly belonged to Buddhist meditation centers or other Buddhist organizations, and for whom both Judaism and Buddhism kind of served as their framework for meaning making. And these were people who really saw themselves as truly both. And I would say that was the smallest group of those who I interviewed, were those people who really were the boths.
Interesting. So let me reach more specifically in regards to what are the reasons that you believe that Jews have been attracted to Buddhism. I know in your book you mentioned 4 categories that you have said, like historical reasons, religious and theoretical, demographic, and I believe pull explanations. But I'm curious for the average person, because I think many people see just very different philosophies in Judaism and Buddhism. So what do you believe is the attraction for many Jews to Buddhism?
First, I just want to offer a disclaimer that I think this is a really hard question to answer. And the study that I did was an ethnography. So I did a lot of interviews and I talked to people, but by nature of the type of research that I did, the ethnographic research, I'm not able to show causality, right? To say or to prove even correlation, that this is what leads to that. I can't say that. What I could say based on the interviews that I did and the conversations that I had was, what I saw, what I interpreted as the reasons. And I think that they were complicated reasons. And then there were historical reasons about the relationship between Judaism and Buddhism historically in the United States, which means that it's been largely neutral in the United States, as opposed to, let's say, Judaism and Christianity, which has a fraught and complicated history, not just in the United States, globally, particularly in Europe, but Judaism and Buddhism don't have that relationship with each other. So I think many American Jews felt much more comfortable or at ease exploring Buddhism in that respect. There were certainly very strong demographic explanations for the Jewish interest in Buddhism. Buddhism tends to appeal to people who live in urban contexts, who are highly educated, tend to be upper middle class. I'll say white, although not necessarily. This is for Buddhism that is a convert Buddhism that is particularly geared towards a more white audience, although it's not necessarily all white now. There's many other people of color, but I'm comparing that to like an Asian Buddhist temple, which certainly has a largely Asian membership base. But in these more American Buddhist centers, that pull these urban, educated, more upper middle class practitioners, they tend to pull a lot of Jews, and Jews are overrepresented in that segment of American society, the urban, the highly educated, etc. So it's like, birds of a feather flock together. And I think that that's a strong explanation for why there's so much, why you see so much Jewish interest in Buddhism. And I think that there's other explanations that are both, spiritual and religious too, that American Jews are finding something in Buddhism that they're not finding in other traditions, that they're able to think about it, that it's very practice oriented, especially meditation. And that's very compelling to many. And for others, it offers a completely different philosophical system, Buddhism. And that in and of itself is compelling in a contrast to Judaism and other Abrahamic religions. So again, I think the explanations are quite complicated, and there are many, and it's all of these things kind of tied up together.
So I certainly want to go back to things like meditation and stuff a little bit later, but in your book, you go through periods of Jewish and Buddhist engagement in the United States. That's a good chunk of the book. And I'm curious, what do you think have been the most significant interactions or leaders to bridge the two communities? Just because it always seems like when movements come together, there's always some sort of significant event, or this person met this person and that led to. So I'm curious if through your research, if there were significant either events or individuals meeting that helped in those moments of bridging the two faiths.
So I think that there were more events that began. We can kind of think about specific encounters as an encounter that began in the post-war period.
Abraham, should I stop now?
That's fine. Certainly the book will explain a very detailed history of exactly who did what and when to create this evolution and how Jews got involved. I personally have always been curious, and for example, here in Lambertville, there's a Buddhist center, which is Tibetan Buddhism. Of course, there are Americans there, but it has all the trappings of all the different Tibetan deities and the idols and the bowing and all of that. I've also been to the one in Massachusetts, in Barrie, called Insight Meditation. And there you'll see a lot of Jews. In fact, it was started by 4 people, and I think 3 of them or 4, all were Jews. And they very quickly learned that in the people who came, that they would get a lot of pushback if they positioned Buddhas around or did any bowing. So they very quickly stopped doing that. They focused on the practical aspects of what meditation can do for you and the teachings around that. And that is more like what has influenced Jews. Now, what I want to do now is talk a little bit about some of the notes that I've taken from reading the book. And there's a term I'm always intrigued by coming across words that I don't know. And this one is new. It's called the concept of syncretism. And Sigalou talks a lot about it. And it is, in essence, the combination of different forms of belief and practice, the fusion of 2 or more originally different inflection forms. Now, I'll give an example. In my view, an example of syncretism, for example, just the other day during the Hanukkah celebration, I noticed that some of the Hanukkah songs used secular tunes. Now that makes sense because we all know those, so you can sing along with the words, but it's not historically a Jewish piece of music. I had one of the courses that I took from the teaching company years ago on Buddhism talked about this very concept of how there are so many different forms that they borrow from one another. And the one that stands out so vividly for me, that in schooling one particular branch of Buddhism, they would have the kids sing, "Buddha loves me, this I know, for the sutras tell me so." Anyway, I suppose you all know the Christian melody for that. Now, early introducers were funders of Buddhist teachings were Jewish. The book talks about some very wealthy people creating institutions that promoted Buddhism because they thought it was a good thing to do. A lot of Jews were involved with other very liberal branches, for example, like ethical culture, which was created by a Jew, Felix Adler. But most did not abandon their Jewish identity. Newer liberal versions of Judaism, like Reform Judaism, interpret it as consistent with rational and universal characteristics, comparable with scientific discoveries. And these values reverberated from free-thinking groups: Unitarians, Theosophists, vegetarians. Others held very steadfast to their beliefs to be incursions. Pollutions from the outside. Rabbi Gutman was kind of alluding to impurities, that follow your own. But there's always been a blending and a borrowing with all groups. And there's this idea of the impure. I mean, the Torah speaks a lot about impurities, and it's always a struggle for me as to what constitutes a pure impurity. I could see immorality, I could see, the unethical, but the idea of just being impure is something that I struggle with. One of the things that is not mentioned with the American Buddhists is, having multiple deities, reincarnation. Gutman cited reincarnation. Well, I don't know of any American Jewish, Buddhists who talk about reincarnation. Bowing, statues. There are people who surprised me that came from Jewish backgrounds. Surya Das, Pema Chandran. I've read a number of her books. I really think she's fabulous. The only one I can reach right now is this one here by Pema. Although she did convert, although there is no conversion process for Buddhists. You just decide you're going to do that and you do it. But how about Ram Dass? The list is long. Here's Sylvia Boorstein, and she's very Jewish. She's a Jewish mama, Jewish grandma. She talks with a Jewish accent, and she's wonderful that way. She's a good teacher. But I was really most blown away. I had no idea that Pema came from a Jewish background. There are other self-development groups that some Jews were attracted to. Gurdjieff was an interesting character. Then there's the American Zen group, Allen Ginsberg. And they wanted to emphasize the authority of the individual as opposed to the group. Daniel Goldman. Krishna Das's name is Jeffrey Kegel. Then there are institutions like Naropa, let's see, and they muted dogmas and the mythological histories. Jubu teachers found commonality between the four teachings of mindfulness, loving kindness, ethics, and generosity, with Gimel Hasidim from Pirkei Avot. I mean, there's a natural, wonderful crossover that you could say, yeah, this is the same story from another group. There's also Hisbodedut, the private prayer in natural surroundings. It's not commonly done, but that is Buddhist-like in nature. The liberal ethics of American Judaism paved the way for Jews to encounter and ultimately reconfigure Buddhism in the second half of the 20th century. An interesting story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he sent out Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi to recover the Jews lost, in the flower power era, and ended up really changing himself a lot and created I think he founded Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal, which was a more pluralistic Judaism. Communists suspected that the lack of spiritual possibilities within American Judaism, at least at that time, led many to look to Buddhism for spiritual fulfillment. Renewal led back to incorporating ancient Jewish contemplative techniques. Now, we've been doing that here at Kehilat. I mean, Rabbi Sandy brought to us the contemplative Shabbats, which is very different, but it very centered on quietness and of being thoughtful, of meditating, of chanting, of study. The thing that I had been doing for so long, the Pardes exercises, which examines some text on different levels of depth. Then we have groups like, and some of you have participated in this, Eilat Chaim Center for Jewish Spirituality in the Catskills, founded in 1992. They deliberately synthesized Judaism with various non-Judaic practices, including Buddhist practices. They innovated such as, and this has surprised me, Jewish prayer flags with hamsas, or zafus with Magen Davids, and meditation bells. Later, they merged with the Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center in Connecticut, and it's still active today. And they have carried on the Jewish meditation practice and really brought it to its full blossom today. And that's really an innovation in Judaism. And then one of the characters mentioned a lot in the book is Rabbi Alan Lew. And I say that looking at Rabbi Diana, because I know when she joined us, she was very much influenced by his teachings. And Rabbi Liu had practiced Buddhism apparently for a period of 10 years, and then abandoned to return to Judaism. And he's written a number of books. We have some of them in our library. The one that's called "This is Real and You Were Completely Unprepared." Liu said, many forms of meditation do not threaten Jewish theology. That's an interesting idea. There's a first generation of Jewish teachers of Jewish descent, followed by Jewish teachers repackaging meditation within a Jewish framework. Kabbalah and mystical teachings were rediscovered and updated. Jewish mindfulness became a formal teaching and training. The mezuzah became a touchstone for paying attention. Now there's another current name, Rabbi Jeffrey Roth is mentioned. He has a significant following today. Rabbi Sheffa Gold, one of my favorites, is a leader of creating new music adaptations to prayer. Why not? This is a new departure, and it still works. It still answers, fulfills its mission. So these were teachers primarily from the liberal branches of Judaism, the Reform, Reconstructionist, Renewal, Conservative, non-denominational. The construction of Jewish meditation thus began with a radical detraditionalizing or even secularization of Buddhism, and then ended up with a re-traditionalization and sacralizing in Jewish form. I remember, Susan, did you not do in the early years Jewish yoga at the shul? And you said somehow it's Jewish, and it is. It works. So author
That was
Sigala-
with Rabbi Sandy.
That was with Rabbi Sandy. Okay, but I thought you had done that yourself. No, okay. We're going back a few years. Author Sigalo's analysis spans the syncretism of religious practice to syncretism of spiritual discourse, kinship of spiritual experience, a vocabulary of experience developed. It speaks to the individual more than the family history or group traditions. Examples given by Rabbi Liu, who practiced Buddhism for a decade before circling back to Judaism and bringing his acquired thoughts. Spirituality has an ineffable quality, making it able to cross boundaries, making is central to contemplative practice and study. And then some of my own editorializing here, whereas religions tend to divide. I mean, to me, Rabbi Gutman was playing a we-they game. We do that and they do this. Well, there's no need to do that. Spirituality frequently unites faiths and cultures and erases differences. You see that all the time in groups where there are multi-denominational, multi-faith groups. Many feel that being Jewish is not a choice, but a fact of religious history. A chain of memory is a private experience, not a ritual. Some do not describe themselves as Buddhists, but practicing Buddhism. Religious identities in America are growing more elastic and fluid. Jews look to sacred texts, holidays, and prayer, and to Buddhism for the techniques of practice to live a better, happier life. It is a body-based spiritual experience. Buddhism and Judaism do not have a fraught history as existed with Christianity and Islam. And Sigalo mentioned that in her interview. If you read the history of Jews, it is gripping as to the conflicts. At any rate, I wanted to first do a short PowerPoint, and then we'll have a discussion. And in the PowerPoint, I just assembled, I assembled various slides that I found and thought that this might be indicative as to what's happening now, because these are all things that come into my laptop from various organizations. These are the books that I had on the flyer. Next, Jerry, please. Yeah, I try to define this syncretism definition, because I think it's important to understand that things are fluid, and we don't have to be frightened of that. We don't consider that a threat. We just need to understand it and make proper use. Here's one of the many organizations that I came across, the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. They have all these programs, all these events, all these retreats, all these publications. And here's one that I just copied, and to show that these things you can all find. And you'll notice that they use the term midot. That's from one of the historically Jewish practice of Musar.
Abraham, I taught there for 3 years. I
Yes.
taught yoga with Jewish teachings.
Okay, fabulous. Okay. Next. Here's our Shefa, and she has her own organization, Center for Devotional Energy and Ecstatic Practice. And I've always enjoyed her search for the positive. How do you take something that could be challenging and find what's good about it and emphasize that? But she does that very well, and I really love her. Next. This is a group called Soulful Judah. Oh, this is from the group in Princeton. Yes, the Jewish Center, which I believe is Reform. They have it's like a meditation mincha, and they have it's a very strong, large organization. I like to mind their thinking to see what we can do for ourselves on a smaller scale, and they do good work. Next. An article about Yom Kippur in a Buddhist monastery. There are so many articles that are floating around. I don't remember exactly what why I pulled that up, but I thought it was so different. I thought I'd just throw that in. Next. And this is a group called Mitsui Collective. I don't know anything about them other than it's come through my my laptop, and it's community building, and it looks like they have the concern about justice, racial equity. That's interesting that they do that, which everybody should do. Next. And this group here, Embodied Jewish Learning. I don't remember what it is about them, but
I'm a member of it if you ever want to know more.
Okay. Next. This is a newbie. This just a couple of years ago, a group of Madison Avenue tech savvy people started this group called JewBelong.com, and they are in your face kind of ads and rewritten Haggadahs and prayers, but what they are doing is looking to re-engage people who are like the Bagels and Lox group, who really know nothing, and say, hey, come here, there's something here that you might like. And I thought they're really interesting. They use clever things. You see at the bottom, the Yom Kippur cheat sheet. For hip kids, that might work. It's a problem that all Jewish organizations have today, that they're worried about survival. These people are doing something about that. Next. This is the same group. It's just another promotion for a book. Next. And this, I think, is also the group in Princeton. Next. Yeah, Mativia. Rabbi, do you know this group? Yeah, they're
But I know Rabbi Ann Brenner.
okay.
She's done a lot of work around grieving within Judaism.
Okay, so that so it's interesting. I mean, the whole breathing thing is probably Easter.
Grieving.
Oh, grieving. Oh, I think you said
death and-
breathing.
Yeah, mourning and death.
Oh, okay. Excuse me. Next. And this is just a teaching on his Bodhidot. There's a course that. Okay, now this is us. This is Jane doing meditation via Zoom. And I think it's so cool that we have that. There's a lot going on, and I'm especially proud that we have so much talent in our own group to be doing these things. Next. And I just kind of threw in a couple of book covers. This is very funny. It's almost like a joke. Sheldon, come home. Enough's enough. Next, I mean, this is a true story. And then, of course, this is the cover book that was very famous by John Kabat-Zinn, who was really instrumental in creating what he started at I think, Mass General Hospital 35 years ago, is now all over the country. And it has helped many people who are stressed because of heart ailments or psychological ailments. And there are many teachers that have learned from this, and they just don't use the word Buddhism. Next. Okay, that's it. So we'll turn this off, and let me ask, or let's have a discussion. We've got a few more minutes left. Yes, Miriam, you're muted.
I always felt that the surge, well, for me, it was a surge in the middle of the last century, around the 50s and 60s, of Jews going into Buddhism was due to the rejection of the Judaism that was developed as a response to the war, where people were basically eliminating Judaism, everything that was visible, just trying to blend in and be white American, and not wanting to be different in any sense. And so the spirituality was lost. And I mentioned this once. I had a discussion with my rabbi at that time in New Hampshire, Lewis Research, and he said all of the spiritual teachers were killed in the war. So I see a lot of this surge in Buddhism with Judaism, with Jews as a response to the war. I know where I grew up, there was no spirituality. It's just, you went to synagogue, you went to Hebrew school, but there was nothing warm. There was no warmth to it, except for the food.
Yeah, my own experience is that my Jewishness was very harsh. This is what you do, don't ask questions. Anybody else? Yes, Diane. You're unmute yourself. Yes.
I was brought up in an Orthodox community, and I don't know about other Orthodox communities, but there was no access to any spirituality anywhere, at least for the females. And so when suddenly I was exposed to the possibility of really learning about spirituality and meaning in my life, I was very attracted to it, to the whole idea of Buddhism, because there was no access otherwise in where I was brought up.
what was it Buddhism or was it a Jewish adaptation of Buddhism?
No, it was definitely Buddhism. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think one of the phrases that really struck home after years was first, the mountain is a mountain, then it's not a mountain, and then it is a mountain. But as we come back to it, so I feel like I kind of left Judaism, or maybe never embraced it in the first place. But then when I came back, it had a whole completely different meaning because of my attraction and study of Buddhism.
For me, the existence of a history of Jewish meditative practices was absent. That we simply weren't educated enough or far enough to know that there were practices historically that spoke to that. So absent that, it was, it was natural that if you have this orientation to spiritual ideas, that wherever you found it, that's where you find it.
I think I was really blessed to be of a generation that in my 20s, I came across spiritual teachers in the Jewish world who had already touched Eastern practices and then had started to blend them or go back and find meaning in Judaism, so that already in my 20s, I was sitting on meditation retreats with rabbis who were, bringing in a combination of Buddhism and Judaism. And I would say my Judaism has been so influenced by Buddhist influenced Jews that it's part of the Judaism I know, just from an adult learning Judaism, since I don't really count my Judaism of childhood as where I learned Judaism. Mom understands, she's on the call.
Scott?
It's so interesting that Rabbi Diana mentions that, because I learned, I learned a bit about Buddhist meditation and mindfulness meditation, what you were calling earlier the medicalized version of meditation, through some of my training and through some of my practice and continuing education. And it wasn't until about, I think, 8 years ago that Rabbi Diana took me on a Jewish meditation retreat with probably the people she's talking about. And I was introduced to that, and also attending your Pardes mornings. That I was introduced to these kinds of things and really focusing in those kinds of ways, in the spiritual kinds of ways. And I find that the combination of the two actually has influenced even the work, my own practice in my daily life, as far as mindfulness, occasionally meditation, and also in the work I do with therapy clients. And so, yeah.
Thank you. I certainly celebrate our openness to consider, anything that works well. And I will share with you that I have a sister who's a ultra-Orthodox Rebbitzin, and she has said to me that what I'm doing is not Jewish. All right. Susan, you have any comment? Oh, yes. Kirk, please.
Thank you, Abraham. First, I want to say that to thank you, Abraham, and thank you all for this conversation, which I'm finding revivifying and just really stimulating. I appreciate it. Even just hearing Gurdjieff and Ram Dass invoked and Allen Ginsberg, people I read some 30 years ago that were so influential to me as a Jubu. It was in the context of Allen Ginsberg, I think, that I first heard the term Jubu, and I thought, yeah, me too. But I want to say that the one issue or item that hasn't been mentioned, it seems to me, is monotheism. And to me, one of the big differences between Judaism and let's call it Eastern spiritualism for a moment, is this idea of worshiping to this male figure up in the sky somewhere with the great beard, or the Judaic vision of God. Even when the rabbi was speaking in the first video excerpt, God was assumed. It was assumed that there would be this figure. One assumes it's male, And of course, one doesn't worship to Buddha. One studies the Buddhistic teachings and one finds Buddhahood within oneself. And to me, that was life-changing when I first discovered that. And I still, to this day, always consider myself Jewish first somehow, but I more than dabble in Buddhism, let's say, and appreciate all of this. Thank you all.
Rabbi, yes. Go
The
ahead.
good news is there's so many Judaisms, and there's by no means the only way of seeing God in Judaism is a male up there. The more we read deeper into Hasidic texts and certain Kabbalistic texts, there's a much more nuanced and less out there aspect of God, even within Judaism. And so that's been revelatory for me to realize that there's ways that I don't have to just translate and pretend. There's real theologies within Judaism. It's still monotheistic, but the way that God is described is very different than what you're describing, which I certainly personally can't relate to either. But I really appreciate that, like, anyone who's only been exposed to that aspect of God would be, not anyone, but many people would be turned off and would turn to other ways if that were the only approach available, which makes sense to me. And there's just beautiful teachings inherent in Buddhism, which is why I also disagreed with the way the first rabbi presenting that it has to be us or them. Both paths. Also, by the way, Abraham, I looked it up because I was so blown away. And actually, I read an interview that Pema Chodron, in fact, grew up Catholic. It's from her own voice.
Really?
Yeah, she grew up Catholic. Her mother was Catholic. Her father was not. So she was never a strict Catholic. But friends tell me I was very spiritual. And she married a man who was Jewish and was really enamored with. That was a whole new approach that
I read
she'd never
the
seen
wrong
before.
information.
I just was like, wait, Pema Chodron?
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I was
that one just was, yeah, everyone else you mentioned, I was like, yes. But I did a little searching because I just was like, I remember seeing the Catholic thing beyond Wikipedia. I found an interview.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this idea of God not being part of the conversation in Buddhism, I find intriguing because they're talking about behaviors. They're talking about ways of thinking, of how to reframe things, how to stop and be the observer of yourself. I mean, those are important pieces of business from one's life. And I like how practical it is.
I did a workshop with Pema Chodron about 15 years ago, and she certainly sounds like a New York Jew, but in fact, she's a New York Italian.
Okay. Very cool. Susan, you have any reflections?
I was reflecting Scott talking about using, mindfulness and meditation and in his practice, as I do as well. And what was coming up for me is I'm engaged in a certification program to be compassion-based psychotherapy, really being taught by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, who are sort of the generation from Sharon Salzberg, Sylvia, like all of this stuff. And one of the things that I was just so blew me away, and I was so heartened by in beginning the program, Martin Buber was talked about a lot with the I Vow tradition. So these lineages and the way that they play out, especially like in psychotherapy circles, world, and how that's sort of, that presence is really inspiring for me as well. And there is just, again, I see so much unity in so many of these ideas. Carl Rogers, and really about connection, Buber, Buddhism, connection, right? Connection, that we're all connected. So and thank you so much for this. This was really inspirational. It's so nice to land on this stuff. Thank you, Abraham.
Thank you.
And I'd love to get a copy of that PowerPoint because of all the references of those places. So
oh yes, I will. If anybody wants, send me an email and I'll reply with that. And also, I can give you more information about the book. I buy books used, so this was not full price. Kurt, if you would send me your email, since you're new, I don't have your email. I want to hear more about your interest and background. Okay, anything else? I think this will be concluded for today, and thank you all for coming. And
Shukran, thank you.
Thank you, Abraham.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Abraham.
Thank you.
all right, bye-bye.
Thank you tremendously.